obviously the seeds have told us through the reading of your work that the cloning has been going on a long time.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about like how they've defined it?
Well, it seems like what they were talking about mainly was uh, apparently a lot of the so-called aliens that get seen uh, were cloned, and supposedly a lot of human beings who've been abducted have had specimens taken from them to clone. And I think that some part of that is involved in, they clone an individual and then they accelerate their growth so that they uh, get to be an equivalent age. And they do things to or with your cloned match. And those things that they do to or with them, then can affect you in this reality. And of course, this is in another reality, probably in hyperdimensional space. But, there's that going on, and then there is, probably cloning multiple copies of some particular individual who, um, would be, useful for various purposes. I mean, maybe like warriors or just ordinary workers and that sort of thing. But the problem with cloning is, and this goes back to what we talked about before, functional understanding and experiential understanding. Functional understanding is very robotic. And if what they're after is robotic type creatures, that's kind of what they're getting. If they want something with experiential understanding, and I think that's one of the things that they are, one of the reasons they are fascinated, or I wouldn't say fascinated, one of the reasons they are using human beings is because many human beings, if not 50% of them, have individuated souls. Um, and that's going to be kind of a shocking thing to say, because a lot of people think that everybody has a soul. We're inculcated with that idea, for
Right.
all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Um, but it seems that it's not necessarily so, that there are a lot of uh, people, human beings, who are just possessors of functional understanding because they're evolutionary creatures in a sense. And that's a whole other topic, so don't get me off on the whole evolution thing. Um, yeah, so they're interested in us, and they're interested in getting, I think, a lot of bodies prepared for them to incarnate into, or at least bloodlines set up that will produce infants that they can incarnate into in a less third density realm, because they're planning this whole takeover at the transition to fourth density. So they're setting things up all over the place, and they're also, and in order to do that, they have to set up their controls over humanity in third density before it transitions. So that's why there's so much concentration on all this stuff right now, because we're in that transitional phase. So yeah, there's a lot of different things going on, cloning for different reasons, sometimes cloning for body parts, uh sometimes cloning for servants, cloning for uh, women to bear infants. And, that kind of goes back to the incarnational options of DNA. They want to have the right options available, for their own incarnational experiments. And, in the DNA for a hyperdimensional person would necessarily be uh, somewhat different than ours. Or perhaps the real story is that ours was originally fourth density DNA, but it has been suppressed, or it has been truncated in some way so that it doesn't function as it originally was intended to. So, yeah, there's uh, I had this really interesting thought one day when I was on the treadmill at the gym, uh, and I was thinking about all the stories of vampires and werewolves. Werewolf forms. A vampire has, strange things, and he thrives on blood and different other rare creatures that transform in a very short period of time. I mean, according to the movies, it happens in minutes, but I don't
Right.
know if that's necessarily true. But I thought about that, and I thought about the fact that, our stomach lining replaces itself once, every 24 hours or something, and all the cells in our body replace themselves, you know, at different rates. I think the pancreas is pretty fast because, the hormone or the bile and the bile salts and so forth kind of chew that up pretty quick. So we have all different parts of our body that replace themselves, and they're controlled by genes that either turn things on or turn things off. And it occurred to me that this whole story about these transitions of these werewolves could have been stories of individuals whose DNA uh, was some portion of their DNA that wasn't normally operative was turned on. And that, I mean, for example, digestive things. They're creatures that have uh, a steady diet of one kind of food, and they produce the enzymes or the digestive juices or whatever to digest that particular food. And if that food is taken away and they are put in an environment with a completely other kind of food, their DNA upregulates the kind of gene that can digest this new food, and it downregulates the one that was operational for the previous kind of food so that they can now digest something new and different. Upregulation and downregulation of genes is what we're looking at here. So if we can transform into hyperdimensional beings who have greater mental control of our physiology, and if that could happen from the upregulation of a set of genes that would turn that ability on, we could literally transform, as they say, in the twinkling of an eye. Or I think it might take a little longer than that, but the point is that it'd be fairly quick. Um, so those things are possibilities for transformation, but those kinds of things, come only after a long period of work or after a period of preparation, or if you're at the right FRV, frequency resonance vibration. And then the CE said, very important, because I was asking some questions about this at one point during the sessions. And I said, receivership capability was the important thing. Because if the external frequency were to change in a certain way, and if an individual had receivership capability, that itself could upregulate or downregulate certain genes, which also leads to the thought, and you're going to get an example of how my brain works here, of what these crazy waves that they're sending out, such as HARP, the 5G,
Right.
microwave radiation, the Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi or whatever people want to call it, those kind of things. Those things, I think, are capable of upregulating or downregulating genes. And I think that's the scariest thing about them. Um, and I mean, that's not even adding in a vaccine that's got mRNA that, obviously can turn genes on or off, depending on what the person has to begin with. I mean, when that thing gets in there, it starts unpacking itself. And depending on what it finds in your cell, what kind of DNA, it can do all kinds of different things. And some of them are really scary.